On a cold and busy street corner, a woman sat hunched over, her arms tightly wrapped around her child. The city buzzed around her, people walking in every direction, absorbed in their own world. The noise of traffic, the chatter of strangers, the honking of cars, it all felt distant to her. In her heart there was only silence, the silence of hunger, the silence of desperation. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her face pale and thin from days without food. She hadn't eaten in what felt like forever. Her child, no older than 2, rested in her arms, eyes closed, exhausted from hunger and the cold. The woman looked at her child, her heart aching. The child's tiny hands clutched at her, trying to hold on to the last bit of warmth her mother could offer. She took a deep breath, trying to gather the strength to speak, but her voice was weak.
"Please, just some food for my baby." Her voice trembled as she whispered the words, almost as if afraid someone might hear her. She hadn't begged like this before. It felt humiliating, but it was the only option left. As she looked
up, she saw a man walking toward her, his face hidden behind a scarf. He was young, maybe in his 30s. The woman's heart skipped a beat. Could he be the one to help? He was so close now, walking right past her. Her eyes locked onto him, silently pleading for a moment of kindness, but the man didn't even glance her way. He walked right past her as if she didn't exist. The woman's heart sank. She could feel the cold creeping into her bones. It wasn't just the chill of the night air. It was the coldness of being invisible, of being nothing more than a shadow in the eyes of those around her. Her eyes followed the man as he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat but couldn't. A single tear slid down her cheek. She had been here for hours, maybe longer, but it felt like a lifetime. She was used to the cold looks, the turned heads, the quick steps that avoided eye contact. People didn't want to see her, they didn't want to acknowledge her pain. She was just another homeless person, just another person who had fallen through the cracks. She tried again. "Please, just a little... anything." Her words were barely audible, swallowed up by the noise of the city. She didn't expect much, maybe a kind glance, or if she was lucky, someone might drop a coin in her hand. But the world had taught her not to hope. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. A woman with a large bag passed by, her face focused, not even noticing the woman and her child. The woman begged, her voice a little louder this time. "Please, we're hungry." But the woman didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. It was like the woman didn't even exist. The woman's hands trembled as she wiped the tear from her cheek. Her child shifted in her arms but didn't wake. It was as though even the child understood the hopelessness of their situation. Her baby was too young to know the world's cruelty, but still there was a sadness in those little eyes when they opened, a sadness that came from more than just hunger. Every now and then, someone would glance at them, but they never stopped. The world moved on, and the woman stayed there as if trapped in some invisible cage. She didn't know how much longer she could keep begging. Every time she asked, it felt like a piece of her dignity slipped away. She wasn't proud of this life, but what else could she do? Her child needed food, needed care, and she had nothing left to give but her pleas. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the noise of the street. She focused only on her baby, holding the child close, as if she could protect them from the world's indifference. But the world didn't care. The people who passed by didn't care. They were too busy with their own lives to see the desperation that clung to her like a second skin. Another few minutes passed. The woman looked up again, her eyes scanning the crowd. Her heart was heavy. She could feel the weight of the cold night pressing down on her. The streetlights flickered as if they too were tired of watching. And then, just when she thought she couldn't go on any longer, a figure stopped in front of her. A man. He was tall, his face hidden beneath a hood. But there was something different about him. His footsteps were slower, more deliberate. He didn't walk past her like the others. He stood there just a few feet away. She couldn't see his eyes, but she could feel his gaze heavy on her. "Please," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. She didn't know what else to say. This might be her last chance. Her eyes, tired and empty, met his. She waited for him to turn away like the others, but he didn't. The man reached into his bag. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he would help. But what happened next surprised her. He didn't pull out money, or food, or anything she had expected. He pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, holding it out to her. Confused, she took it, unfolding the paper carefully. It was just a simple note. "Meet me tonight, near the alleyway behind the market. I can help. Trust me." Her fingers trembled as she read the words. Who was he? What did he mean? She looked up, but the man was already walking away, disappearing into the crowd. The woman stared at the note in her hand, her heart racing. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or scared. Who was this man, and what did he want from her? But the truth was she had nothing to lose. Desperation clouded her judgment, but this was a chance. She stood up slowly, clutching the note tightly. She had to find out more. Maybe, just maybe, this stranger would be the one to help her. Or maybe, he was just another illusion in a world that had long since stopped caring. With her baby in her arms, she began to walk toward the alleyway, uncertain of what awaited her, but unable to stop herself. It was the only choice she had left. The alleyway was darker than she expected. The streetlights cast long, flickering shadows as the woman stepped hesitantly between the abandoned buildings. Her heart was racing, the small note clutched tightly in her hand. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as though the weight of her past was pulling her back. The city behind her felt like another world, one she had long since been disconnected from. She adjusted the child in her arms, trying to steady herself. The baby, still asleep, shifted in her embrace but didn't wake. Her child was too small to understand the risk she was taking. But the woman knew. She had lived in this city long enough to recognize that not every stranger offered kindness. There was something unsettling about this man. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just walked into something much bigger than herself. As she neared the alley's end, the sounds of the busy streets faded away. The buzz of the city, the honking of cars, the murmurs of passers-by, all of it seemed to evaporate. It was eerily quiet here, with only the distant hum of the city's heart pulsing from far away. The walls of the alleyway were covered in old graffiti, and discarded garbage littered the ground. A broken street lamp flickered overhead. It was the kind of place where no one would look twice if something went wrong. But there, standing under the light, was the man. He was just as she remembered. Tall, cloaked in a hood that obscured most of his face, but the faint outline of his jawline could be seen. He didn't seem threatening at first glance, but there was something about him that made her pause. His stillness, his patience, made the air around him feel charged. "You're here," he said softly, his voice calm, but with an edge she couldn't place. The woman stopped a few feet away from him, keeping her child close to her chest. She didn't know what to say. She had expected something different, perhaps, but all she had now was the lingering question that had been gnawing at her since the moment she saw the note. Why was he helping her? Why did you help me?" she managed to ask. Her voice was trembling and she hated it. But this was the moment, the one where everything could change. She needed answers. The man didn't answer right away. He simply studied her as though weighing her every move. The woman could feel the tension between them, the unspoken words that hung in the air. "You've been invisible for too long," he said finally, his eyes narrowing as if to see deeper into her. "People pass by you every day, they ignore you. They don't see your pain, but I do." His words caught her off guard. There was no pity in his voice, no judgment. It was almost as though he understood exactly what she had gone through, as though he had seen it 1,000 times before. "I don't understand," she whispered, shaking her head. "Why me? Why now? There are so many others out there who need help too." The man stepped closer, lowering his hood. For the first time, the woman saw his face. Sharp features, a few days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her. They were dark, filled with an intensity that felt like they were searching for something. Or perhaps someone. And she couldn't look away. "I help those who are forgotten," he replied, his tone steady. "The ones no one cares about, the ones whose cries go unheard. You've been living on the edge for so long that you've become part of the city's background noise. But you don't have to live like that anymore." His words were like a rope thrown into the water, and for the first time in a long time, the woman reached out to grab it. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But the skeptic inside her, the part of her that had learned to survive by trusting no one, kept her frozen. "I don't know what you want from me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression softened slightly. "I don't want anything from you, not in the way you think. I simply want to give you a choice, a chance. You deserve more than this life on the streets. And your child does too." Her heart skipped at the mention of her baby. Every decision she made from here on out was for her child, for the tiny human who depended on her. She had failed her so far. Could she afford to trust this stranger? Was she willing to risk everything for the chance of a better life? For a moment she hesitated, her mind spinning with the possibilities. She had heard whispers of organizations that helped people like her, but they always seemed too good to be true. She had seen promises of help that led to nothing but betrayal. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away," the man said, almost as if reading her mind. "But I am asking you to listen." The woman's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what was more terrifying. The thought of staying in her current life, a life of suffering, or the thought of walking into the unknown with a man she had just met. But her child needed a future where hunger didn't have to be her constant companion, where she didn't have to worry about the cold every night. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. The man gave her a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're not alone anymore. I can help you. But first we need to leave this place. It's not safe for you or for your child." Without another word, he turned and began walking deeper into the shadows. The woman hesitated for a moment, glancing down at her baby, who was still resting in her arms, unaware of the life-altering decision she was about to make. And then, with a deep breath, she followed him. The alley seemed endless, the shadows swallowing them as they walked. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like just another discarded person. There was something about this man, something different, that made her believe she might actually have a chance. But as they walked further into the night, the woman couldn't shake the nagging thought at the back of her mind. Who was this man really? And what did he want from her in the end? The alleyway seemed to stretch on forever, the dim light flickering, above casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The woman followed the man, unsure of what to expect next. The quiet was unnerving, the stillness of the night heavier than it had ever been before. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change, but she didn't know if that change would bring salvation or destruction. Her baby stirred in her arms, the warmth of the small body offering a slight comfort, but the weight of her exhaustion, her hunger, and the uncertainty of her future pressed down on her. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown, but she had no choice. She had made the decision to trust this stranger, and now she would see where it led. There was no going back. The man led her deeper into the city, through narrow streets and hidden pathways she had never noticed before. These were places where the light never reached, where the city's busy pulse was muted, as though these parts were forgotten by time. The woman's heart raced, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sense of something shifting within her. This was the chance she had been begging for, the opportunity to escape the life that had beaten her down for so long. They reached an old, abandoned building at the edge of the city, its walls crumbling and covered in layers of grime and dust. A faint light flickered from a broken window, casting a dim glow into the alley. The man turned to her, his face shadowed once again by his hood. "This is where it starts," he said quietly, his voice almost lost in the night air. This is where your new life begins. The woman stared at the building, unsure of what to say. She had expected something more, grand, something that might look more like hope. This place, though, felt like a ruin, a place no one would come looking for her. She hesitated for a moment, looking down at her child, whose eyes were now fluttering open, still too weak to understand what was happening. "What is this place?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The man glanced around, then nodded towards the door. "It's not much, but it's safe. Safer than the street. We have what you need here and more." She frowned, confused. "More?" The man opened the door and stepped aside, allowing her to enter first. The interior was dim, but as her eyes adjusted, she saw a small, simple room. A single table sat in the center, covered with maps and papers. A few chairs were scattered about, and in the far corner a worn couch sat near a small heater. It wasn't much, but it was better than the cold street. Better than the night spent shivering under the stars with nothing but the hope that someone would care. The man stepped in after her and closed the door behind him. He gestured to the couch. "Rest. You and your child need food, warmth, and rest. You've been through too much." The woman hesitated, looking around, still unsure about the man's intentions. But her body ached for rest, her limbs heavy with exhaustion, and her child's soft cries pulled at her heart. She sat on the couch, gently placing her child beside her. The baby's eyes fluttered open, and the woman cradled the small, fragile body in her arms. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself breathe. She was safe for now. The man stepped over to the table, his face hidden again beneath the shadows of his hood. He began to sift through the papers, pulling out what looked like a small bag of food. He handed it to her but didn't say anything. She looked at the food. Simple, but enough to ease her hunger. She took it gratefully, but her mind raced. What was his plan? Why was he helping her like this? "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, her voice quieter this time. The man didn't turn to look at her, but his voice was steady, almost calm. "Because you deserve a chance. You deserve more than what the world has given you." Her thoughts swirled. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of her past kept pulling her back. People didn't just help others without expecting something in return. What did he want? What was he really after? "The world is harsh," he continued, still looking at the papers. "You've seen it. You've lived it. But there are others who understand. People who don't want to see you disappear, to be swallowed by the streets. And I'm one of those people." The woman swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the food. She could hear her child's soft breathing beside her. "You're different from the others," she said quietly. "But I don't know if I can trust you." The man finally turned to face her. His eyes, dark and intense, locked onto hers. "Trust doesn't come easily, I know that, but I'm not asking you to trust me right now. I'm asking you to trust the opportunity I'm offering you." She felt a pang in her chest. Opportunity. The word lingered in the air like a promise, but one she had heard too many times before. How many promises had she been given? How many times had she been let down, abandoned when she thought things might get better? She couldn't count them anymore. But there was something different about this. Maybe it was the way he spoke, so sure of himself, so calm in the chaos that had been her life. Maybe it was the quiet strength he carried, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Or maybe it was the fact that, for once, someone had stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, as though she mattered. "I don't know what this means," she said softly. "But I can't do this alone. I can't keep going like this. I can't keep watching my child suffer." The man nodded slowly, his face still unreadable. "You don't have to. Not anymore." For the first time in a long while, the woman felt something stir inside her, something she had thought was lost forever. Hope. It was fragile, like a tiny flame in the dark, but it was there. "I'll help you," the man said, his voice firm. "You just have to trust me enough to take the next step." The woman's eyes softened as she looked down at her child, feeling the weight of the decision she was about to make. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone? She didn't. No. But for the first time in years, she felt as though maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take that chance. Okay, she whispered. I'll trust you. And with that, her journey into the unknown began. The days that followed felt like a blur, and yet, everything around the woman seemed to slow down. The man, whose name she still hadn't asked, had kept his word. The small room was now filled with warmth, and her child had a full belly for the first time in days. They were both finally able to rest, but the weight of the unknown still hung in the air. She was safe for now, but what lay ahead? The woman couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. The man had made promises, but promises were easy to make. She needed to know more. What was his true intention? Why had he helped her, of all people? She had been on the streets for so long, overlooked, ignored, and now, here she was, given a chance she never thought would come. But at what cost? One evening, after her child had fallen asleep, the woman sat on the couch, staring at the flickering light of the heater. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The man was sitting across the room, at the table, looking over a stack of papers. His attention was focused on the documents, but she could see the way his fingers moved, slow and deliberate, as if he was waiting for something, or someone. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers. You said I deserve more, she started, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. But I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Why me? The man didn't immediately look up. Instead, he placed the papers down and let out a long breath. I've seen too many people like you, he said softly. Too many people left behind, forgotten by the world. You're not the first person I've helped. But you're different, in ways I can't explain. His words hung in the air, but they didn't satisfy her. How am I different? She asked, her voice quiet but firm. I'm just another homeless woman, just another person who's been thrown away. The man's gaze met hers for the first time in days. There was a hardness in his eyes, a knowing that made her heart beat faster. It's not just that you're homeless. It's that you still have something worth saving. There's strength in you, something that others don't see. People like you don't give up. You're fighting, even when everything is stacked against you. She could feel the weight of his words. They echoed in her mind. But still, something didn't feel right. She needed to know more. She had to. And what about you? What do you want from me? The question seemed to catch him off guard, and for a moment he didn't answer. He stared at the floor, lost in thought. Then he spoke, his voice low. I'm not asking for anything, but you might be involved in something much bigger than you think. His words sent a shiver down her spine. What do you mean? She whispered. The man stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. The streetlights below flickered, and the distant sound of traffic could still be heard. But inside, the room was strangely silent. There are forces in this city and beyond that keep people like you down, he said, turning back to her. The world you see, the one that's broken you, it's controlled by a system that wants to keep people powerless. People who don't have connections, who don't have a way out, are meant to be forgotten. The woman's mind was spinning. She could barely keep up. What system? What are you talking about? He paused for a moment, then spoke again, his voice hard. You were never supposed to get this far. You're a part of something now. Something that's been set in motion for a long time, and there are people who will do anything to make sure you never succeed. People who don't want you to have a choice. She didn't understand, but the fear that she had pushed away for so long was creeping back into her chest. She wasn't just a homeless woman anymore. She wasn't just trying to survive, she had stepped into something much larger than she could imagine. But the question still lingered. What did this man want from her? Who are these people? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What do they want with me? The man walked back to the table and placed a thick file in front of her. He opened it slowly, revealing papers covered in symbols and strange writing that made no sense to her. "This is just the beginning," he said, pointing to the documents. "You have no idea what they're capable of, but you can help stop them. You can help change the system, but first you have to understand what's really happening here." Her hands trembled as she reached for the file. The symbols seemed alien, and yet they felt strangely familiar, as though she had seen them somewhere before. But where? What was all of this? She couldn't make sense of it, but she knew one thing for sure. The man was serious. He wasn't just offering food or shelter. He was offering something much more dangerous, the chance to fight back, to challenge the system that had kept her down for so long. She looked up at him, her heart racing. "What do you need from me?" The man's face was unreadable. "I need you to understand that you're not just a victim. You're more than that. You have the power to change everything, but you can't do it alone. You need to trust me." The woman felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. This was no longer just about survival. This was about something bigger, something that could change the world. But was she ready? Could she trust this man, this stranger, with her life? Could she believe that she was part of something that could make a difference? "Who are you?" "Really?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The man looked at her, his eyes cold and distant. But there was something else there too. A flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Or maybe it was something darker. "I'm the only one who can show you the way," he said softly. "But I can't do it alone. You're the key to everything. If you trust me, we can stop them together." Her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The chance to make a real difference. But was she strong enough? Did she have what it took to fight back against the world that had cast her aside? The woman swallowed hard, looking at her child, then back at the man. "Okay," she whispered, her voice steady for the first time in days. "I'll trust you." But as she spoke the words, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something much darker than she could possibly imagine. The woman's life, as she had known, it seemed to have shifted in the blink of an eye. No longer was she just a mother struggling to survive on the streets. Now she was wrapped up in something much larger, something unknown. Each passing day with the man felt like a step into a new world, and she wasn't sure whether to feel terrified or grateful. Her child slept peacefully beside her, unaware of the danger that hovered at the edges of their world. It was a few days after she had agreed to trust the man, and she was beginning to feel a strange sense of calm. The room they were staying in was warm, and she had learned to appreciate the simple joys that had once felt so distant. A soft bed, a warm meal, a feeling of safety. But despite the comfort, there was still an undeniable tension. There were so many things she didn't understand. The man who had introduced himself as Elias had been distant lately. He spent most of his time poring over the strange documents, muttering to himself about plans and strategies. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, he would glance at her with an unreadable look, his dark eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Was it worry? Or was it something else? One evening, as the light from the setting sun filtered through the dirty window, the door to their small room creaked open. The woman's heart skipped a beat. Elias stood in the doorway, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman, her features obscured by a long hood, but the energy around her was undeniable. There was something about her presence, an aura of power that made the woman's skin prickle. The stranger's eyes, sharp and piercing, locked onto hers almost immediately. It was as if she had been waiting for her, watching from the shadows, calculating. The woman felt a chill run down her spine. "Who is she?" the woman asked softly, though her voice trembled slightly. She held her child closer, instinctively protective. Elias stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak, for a moment, then turned to the woman. "This is Naira," he said. "She's one of us. She's the reason we're here." Naira stepped forward, her gaze never leaving the woman. She moved with quiet grace, almost like a predator stalking its prey. Her voice was smooth, almost hypnotic. "I've heard about you," she said, her tone measured, like she was studying every word before it left her mouth. "You're the one they call the silent beggar, the one no one saw, the one no one helped." The woman's heart fluttered at the mention of her past, of the time when she had been invisible to the world. How had Naira known that? How had she heard of her? She hadn't spoken to anyone in ages. The woman stumbled over her words, still not fully grasping the situation. "How do you know about me?" Naira smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was knowing, predatory. "Elias and I have been watching for a long time. We watch the ones who are forgotten, the ones who slip through the cracks. You're stronger than you realize. You just didn't know it." Elias remained silent, watching them both. There was something about him that seemed different now, colder, distant. It was as if he wasn't fully present, like he had stepped back into the shadows. The woman couldn't help but feel the sudden change. She was no longer the person Elias had first found. She was part of something, but now the man she had trusted was slipping away. Naira continued, her voice cutting through the tension. "I've seen what you can do. You don't even know it yet, but you have power. Power to change things. Power to bring down the system that keeps people like you under control." The woman's eyes widened. "Power? What are you talking about?" Naira's smile grew, though it was still unsettling. "You're not just a victim. You never were. They've been keeping you in the dark, but we can change that. We have the means, the resources, and you have the ability to make it happen." The woman felt a rush of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of fear. Power? What kind of power could she possibly have? She was just a mother, a woman who had fought to survive on the streets for so long. What did Naira mean by that? Elias finally spoke, his voice low. "Naira is right. You've always had this power, but it's been buried beneath years of suffering. You didn't know how to access it, how to make it work for you. But now you have the chance." The woman shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't understand. I'm just a nobody. I've been ignored by everyone. What can I possibly do to change anything?" Naira stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "You've been underestimated your entire life, but that's the beauty of it. They've overlooked you. They've thought you were weak. But you've endured. You've survived. That's where the power lies." The woman's heart raced as she absorbed Naira's words. She didn't know whether to be angry or terrified. How could she possibly have power? She didn't feel powerful. She felt small, invisible. Was this some kind of cruel game? Naira's eyes softened for the briefest moment, and she placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "This is your chance, your opportunity to rise. You don't have to hide anymore. The world needs to see you for who you really are." The woman looked at Elias, hoping to find some reassurance, some explanation. But his face was a mask of indifference, the same unreadable expression that had grown familiar over the past few days. He didn't say anything, just watched the exchange silently, as though he was waiting for something to happen. "I don't know if I can do this," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've never had power. I've always been nothing." Naira's smile returned, this time softer, more confident. "But you will be something now. You'll see. You just need to believe in yourself." A silence hung in the air, thick with the weight of the unknown. The woman wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The world she had known was crumbling, but she wasn't sure if the pieces would rebuild into something better, or something much worse. Naira turned towards Elias. "We need to act quickly. The time is almost here." Elias nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the woman as though waiting for her to make the next move. The woman looked down at her child, the tiny life in her arms. Was this really the right path? Could she trust Naira and Elias? She didn't know, but she had no other choice. Her baby needed a future, and maybe, just maybe, she could find the strength to create it. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do it, I'll help, but I need to know everything. I need to understand what's going on." Neera's smile widened. "Good. We'll begin soon. But first we have to prepare, and you have to be ready." As the woman sat there, her heart filled with both fear and hope, she realized that the road ahead was going to be harder than she could imagine. But maybe, just maybe, it would lead her to something better, a life where she and her child were no longer invisible. The days after agreeing to Neera's offer passed in a blur of uncertainty and silent determination. The woman's life, once filled with the suffocating struggle of survival, had transformed into something unfamiliar. She no longer woke up each morning with the bitter taste of hopelessness gnawing at her. Now, she felt something else, a strange sense of purpose, a quiet fear and yet a flicker of hope. She spent her time with Neera, learning things she never thought she would need to know. Elias, however, remained distant, his cold, calculating demeanor making her uneasy. Every time she glanced at him, she could feel the weight of his gaze, as though he was waiting for something, waiting for her to become what they both hoped she would be. The room they were staying in was now filled with books, papers, and strange devices that Neera called tools of the trade. But the woman didn't care about the gadgets or the papers. She had only one focus, her child. Every decision she made, every step she took was for the future of her baby. She couldn't afford to fail. And the more she learned from Neera, the more she realized just how much was at stake. One evening, as the darkness outside settled over the city like a thick blanket, Neera came to her with a plan. She was excited, her eyes bright with anticipation, but the woman could see the underlying tension in her. This was it, the moment when everything would change. "We're ready," Neera said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "We've been preparing for weeks. Now, it's time to act." The woman nodded, though her mind raced with questions. "What do we do?" Neera looked at her with a piercing gaze. "You have the power to change the course of everything. But first you have to make a choice that will determine everything that comes after." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. The woman felt the weight of them press down on her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but the reality of it hit her all at once. She wasn't just stepping into a fight for survival anymore. She was about to take part in something much bigger, something that could either destroy everything or save them all. "What kind of choice?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. Neera's gaze softened, just for a moment. "The choice of what kind of power you want to wield. Do you want to use it to escape the life you've been trapped in? Or do you want to use it to bring down the system that's kept people like you in the shadows?" The woman's breath caught in her throat. She had heard those words before. The system. The powerful, invisible forces that controlled everything. The ones who made people like her invisible, irrelevant. She had spent her whole life at the mercy of these forces, never questioning them, never understanding how deeply they ran. But now she had a chance to strike back. She had a chance to take control. I don't know," the woman said, her voice shaky. "I just want to protect my child. I want to give her a life where she doesn't have to suffer the way I did." Neera nodded, her expression serious. "That's why you're here. You want to protect your child. You want a better future. But to get there, you have to make a choice. You can walk away from all of this, return to the shadows and live the life you've always known, or you can stand with us and fight. You can change everything, but it won't be easy." The woman's mind was spinning. Fight? For what? Against whom? Was she even ready for this? She had lived her entire life trying to survive, just scraping by. How could she take on a system that was so powerful, so vast? She didn't have the skills, the strength. But then again, wasn't this the chance she had been waiting for her entire life? "Why me?" she asked, her voice small. "Why choose me for this? I'm just a mother. I've never been anyone important." Naira smiled, but it was more of a knowing smile. You're not just a mother. You're the one who's lived through it. You know what it's like to be invisible. You know what it's like to be forgotten. That's the power we need. That's the power you have. The woman's heart raced as the weight of Nira's words settled into her mind. She had always felt like she was just a small part of the world, a nameless face in the crowd. But now she was being told that her suffering, her survival, was a strength. That her pain could be the key to something greater. Could it really be true? Was she strong enough to wield that power? I don't know if I can do this, the woman whispered, her hands trembling as she held her child close. Naira stepped forward, her presence commanding and calm. You already are. You've been doing it all along. You've survived the worst the world has to offer. And now, you have the chance to make sure others don't have to live the way you did. The woman looked down at her child, whose small fingers gripped her shirt tightly. She thought of all the nights they had spent on the cold streets, shivering in the dark, begging for help, only to be ignored. She thought of the countless times she had watched people walk by, pretending not to see her pain, and she realized that she was tired. Tired of being invisible, tired of being powerless. She looked up at Naira, a quiet determination in her eyes. Okay, I'll do it, I'll fight. Nira's expression softened, a look of approval crossing her face. Good. But remember, there's no turning back now. Once you step onto this path, there's no going back. You'll be part of something much bigger than yourself, and not everyone will understand, but you'll be doing it for something that matters. For your child. For the future. The woman nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child, for a world where people like her wouldn't have to suffer in silence, and maybe, just maybe, she could help change it. Naira gave her a small smile, then turned toward the door. We move tomorrow. Be ready. It starts now. As the woman watched Nira leave the room, she felt a surge of energy rise within her. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She was no longer just a victim. She was going to be part of something bigger, a fight for something that mattered, a fight for change, and she would do whatever it took to win. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. The woman stood in the dimly lit room, her heart pounding with a mix of fear, anticipation, and an almost unnatural sense of clarity. Naira had left earlier, telling her to prepare. But for what? She had been promised a chance to change everything, a chance to fight back against the world that had kept her silent and invisible for so long. But as the minutes passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change her life forever. She glanced down at her child, who slept soundly beside her on the couch. The small, peaceful face of her baby brought her a sense of calm, a reminder of why she was here in the first place. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a future where her child wouldn't have to beg for scraps of food on the street, where they could live without fear, without the crushing weight of survival constantly pressing down on them. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Elias appeared in the doorway, his face as unreadable as ever. He had been distant for the past few days, a quiet observer. But today, something was different. There was a sense of urgency in his steps, a fire in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Are you ready? He asked, his voice low but firm. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his question settle in her gut. She didn't know if she was ready, but she couldn't back down now. She had come too far. I think so, she replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. What's next? Elias stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He glanced at the child, then back at her. The time has come to act. You've trained. You've learned. Now you're ready. But this is it. There's no going back. The woman nodded, her heart racing. She had always known that this day would come, the moment when she would have to face the consequences of her decision. She wasn't just going to be a victim anymore. She wasn't going to be a silent beggar. She was going to fight. We need to get to the meeting point, Elias continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. The others will be waiting. This isn't just about us anymore. There's a whole network, a group of people who've been fighting this battle for years. They've been waiting for someone like you. She took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't alone in this fight. There were others out there just like her. They had been waiting for someone to rise, someone to lead the charge against the system that had crushed them all. And now, that someone was her. I'm ready, she said, her voice firmer now, though it still held a tremor of uncertainty. Let's go. Elias nodded, then turned toward the door. He led her out of the room and down the narrow hallway, through the back exit, and into the cold night air. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual noise of the city muffled by the darkness. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the empty alleyways as they made their way toward the meeting point. The woman's mind raced with questions. What exactly were they planning? What would happen when they met the others? She had no answers. But she trusted Elias and she trusted Naira. They had shown her a new world, a world where she didn't have to hide anymore. A world where she could make a difference. They reached an old abandoned building at the edge of the city, one that looked as though it had been forgotten by time. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with shadowed figures. Elias stepped inside first and the woman followed, her heart pounding in her chest. As she entered the room, the figures around her began to shift, their faces emerging from the shadows. She saw men and women of all ages, their expressions a mixture of determination and weariness. Some of them wore simple clothes, while others were dressed in uniforms that looked like they had seen better days. There were no weapons in sight, no signs of violence, but there was a quiet tension in the air, an energy that told her this was not just another gathering. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Elias turned to her, his expression serious. These are the people who have been fighting the system. They've been working in the shadows, gathering information, making plans, but now it's time to take action. The woman looked around at the faces, some of them familiar, others strange. They were all in this together, bound by a common cause, a shared goal. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. A tall man stepped forward, his face weathered by time and experience. He had the kind of presence that made her feel both intimidated and inspired. He held out his hand to her, his grip firm but not harsh. You must be the one Elias spoke about, he said, his voice low and gravelly. The one who's ready to fight. I'm Cade, and I'll be leading this mission. The woman shook his hand, a sense of recognition stirring within her. He wasn't just a leader, he was a symbol of what they were all fighting for. She could feel the weight of his eyes on her, as if he were searching for something inside her, something that would prove she was ready. I'm ready, she said again, this time with more confidence, the words coming easier now. Cade nodded, then turned to the group. Tonight we make our move. We're going after the heart of the system, the one place where everything starts. If we can take that down, we can bring the whole structure crashing down with it. The room fell silent, the gravity of his words sinking in. The heart of the system, the place where it all began. The woman's mind raced as she tried to piece together the plan, but there were no answers yet. Cade wasn't ready to reveal everything. He would tell them when the time was right. For now, all she could do was trust him, trust the people around her, and trust herself. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She wasn't just the woman who begged for food on the streets. She was a part of something much bigger, something that had the power to change the world. As the meeting continued, the woman listened carefully, absorbing every detail. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay ahead, but there was no turning back now. The fight had already begun. The moment she had been waiting for had arrived. It was time to make her move. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She was ready.